Ethan Caldwell had his pick of every beautiful woman in Texas, and he walked right past every single one of them. Past the silk dresses, past the painted smiles, past the girl his father had already chosen for him. He stopped in front of a woman covered in stable dust, her hands rough from years of work nobody ever thanked her for. The room went dead silent, and then Ethan said 4 words that set 2 families on fire. "I'm choosing her, Clara." If this story already got your heart pounding, you haven't heard anything yet. Hit that subscribe button right now, turn on your notifications, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story is traveling. Now let's get into it. Texas. 1898. The Beaumont Ranch sat 12 miles south of Abilene, and for 3 generations it had been slowly dying. The cattle were thin, the fences were rusting, the water rights had been mortgaged twice. And the only reason the Beaumont name still meant anything at all was because of one daughter, the beautiful one, the one who knew how to walk into a room and make men forget themselves. Savannah Beaumont had been raised for exactly one purpose. And tonight, that purpose had a name: Ethan Caldwell. The Caldwell family had more land than some countries, more cattle than most counties combined. And Ethan, tall, dark-eyed, quiet, in the way that powerful men sometimes are, had come to the Beaumont home at his father's arrangement to meet the family and confirm what everyone already understood to be settled business. He would marry Savannah. The Beaumonts would get out of debt. The Caldwells would get a beautiful bride who wouldn't embarrass them at dinner parties. Simple. Clean. Done. That was the plan. But plans in Texas, like fences after a hard storm, had a way of coming apart when nobody was watching. Clara Beaumont had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not because of the dinner, not because of the Caldwells, not because Savannah had spent 2 hours at the vanity mirror practicing her smile while Clara carried buckets of feed to the eastern pasture in the dark. Clara was awake because Dancer, the old gray mare her father called useless, had been laboring through the night, and somebody had to stay with her. Somebody always had to stay. And that somebody in the Beaumont household was always Clara. By the time she heard the carriages arriving in the front drive, she was kneeling in the straw, her dress ruined her hair, coming loose from its braid, her hands dark with work and dirt, and the honest kind of exhaustion that nobody in that household ever seemed to notice. She wasn't supposed to come inside for the dinner. Her mother had made that very clear that morning. "You'll be presentable by 6, or you will not come to the table at all," her mother had said, looking at Clara the way she always looked at her, not with cruelty exactly, but with a kind of tired disappointment, like Clara was a problem that kept failing to solve itself. "I may not make it inside by 6, Clara had said. "Dancer's close." "Then you won't be at dinner," her mother said, and that was that. Clara told herself she didn't care. She had stopped caring about Beaumont family dinners a long time ago. But when Dancer finally delivered a small, strong foal, all spindly legs and wild eyes, Clara sat back in the straw and let herself breathe, and somewhere in the main house she could hear voices and laughter, and the sound of a life she had never quite been allowed to belong to. She stayed in the stable longer than she needed to. She told herself it was because of the foal. It wasn't. She was washing her hands at the outdoor pump when the stable door swung open behind her and boots hit the ground, not the soft leather of her father's shoes or the clicking heels of a Caldwell servant. These were working boots, worn at the heel, quiet. "I was looking for a lamp," a man's voice said. "Thought I saw light under the door." Clara turned around. She had never seen Ethan Caldwell up close before. She had seen him once at a distance during the county cattle auction 2 years back, standing beside his father, the way all sons of powerful men stand, like they're waiting for permission to exist. But up close, he was different. Younger looking than she expected, tired around the eyes in a way she recognized. "You're not going to find a lamp in a birthing stall," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Not the way men usually looked at Clara, which was mostly through her or past her, but directly like she was something worth seeing. "No," he said. "I reckon not." He glanced at the mare and the foal behind her. She do all right? She did fine. Clara turned back to the pump. The dinner's inside. You're going the wrong direction. I know where the dinner is, he said. He didn't move. Clara dried her hands on a rag and looked at him again. Then why are you out here? He was quiet for a second. Then, same reason you are, I expect. She didn't answer that. She wasn't sure what he meant or whether she wanted to know. You're the older sister, he said. It wasn't a question. I am. They didn't mention you. Clara almost laughed. No, she said. They wouldn't. He nodded slowly like that told him something important. I'm Ethan Caldwell. I know who you are. And you're Clara. She said it flat, not an introduction, just a fact. Clara Beaumont, the one who does the fencing. He looked at her hands. She didn't hide them. How long have you been running this ranch? He asked. I don't run it. She picked up the feed bucket. I just keep it from dying. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The wind moved through the gap in the stable door. Somewhere across the drive, the sound of Savannah's laughter drifted out from the lit windows of the main house, bright and practiced and perfectly timed. I should go back inside, Ethan said, but he didn't move. Yes, Clara agreed. You should. He went. Clara stood in the dark long after he was gone, telling herself it didn't mean anything. She was very good at telling herself things didn't mean anything. Inside the dining room, the table had been set with the good china, the set her mother only brought out when the stakes were high enough to matter. Candles, crystal glasses, a roast that had cost more than the week's wages combined. Savannah sat at her father's right hand, luminous in a blue dress that matched her eyes, and she was everything the room needed her to be. Gracious, warm, expertly beautiful. She laughed at the right moments. She asked the right questions. She tilted her head at exactly the right angle when Ethan's father, Victor Caldwell, spoke about the ranch expansion. Victor Caldwell was a large man in all directions. Large hands, large voice, large opinions. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never in his life been told no by anyone who mattered, and he sat at the Beaumont table like he had already purchased it. Fine land you've got here, Beaumont, Victor said, cutting into the roast. Could be finer with the right management. Clara's father, Harold Beaumont, smiled the way starving men smile at the smell of bread. We've had a difficult few seasons, but things are turning around. Of course they are, Victor said agreeably, and everyone at the table understood that he meant of course they are because I'm here, and we both know what's about to happen. Ethan said almost nothing through the first two courses. He watched. Clara slipped in through the back hallway, 20 minutes into the meal. Still in her working dress, she hadn't had time to change, hadn't really tried, and took the empty chair at the far end of the table that nobody had pulled out for her. Her mother's eyes went sharp and cold. Her father didn't look at her at all. Savannah glanced over, then returned to smiling at Victor Caldwell. It was Ethan who noticed her come in. And it was Ethan who watched her the rest of the evening. Not the way men watched Savannah. Not with hunger or calculation, or the quiet math of a man deciding if a woman was worth the investment. He watched her the way you watch someone who is doing something real in a room full of people performing. She ate quietly. She answered when spoken to, which was almost never, and when Victor Caldwell made a sweeping statement about women's understanding of land management, Clara said, without looking up from her plate. Water rights aren't land management. They're a separate legal category. Most ranchers conflate them, which is how they end up losing both. The table went quiet. Victor Caldwell looked at her the way men like him look at women who say things they didn't expect. Is that so? It is, Clara said. The Garrison family 2 counties over lost their eastern pasture last spring, signed a water lease that superseded their grazing rights. Their lawyer missed it. Cost them 400 acres. Harold Beaumont cleared his throat so hard it sounded like a small explosion. Clara reads too much, he said, as if that explained everything. Does she? Victor said. He was looking at her differently now. Not better, not worse, just differently. Savannah laughed softly and touched Ethan's arm. She's always been like that. You get used to it. Clara looked at her sister's hand on Ethan's sleeve and said nothing. After dinner, the men moved to the sitting room. The women were expected to drift toward the parlor and discuss things that didn't matter. Clara stepped outside onto the back porch instead and stood in the dark with her arms crossed against the cool night air, watching the pasture where Dancer's foal was sleeping. She heard the door behind her. "You knew about the Garrison family," Ethan said. She didn't turn around. "Everyone in 3 counties knows about the Garrison family." Not everyone would have said it at that table. Someone should have said it 2 years ago before they signed that lease. She finally looked at him. "Why are you out here again?" "Because it's more honest out here." She studied him. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that in that room everyone is performing something. Your father's performing solvency. Your sister's performing worth. My father's performing generosity." He paused. "And I'm performing contentment." Clara was quiet. The wind moved through the grass. "And what are you when you're not performing?" "I don't know anymore," he said. "That's the honest answer." She turned back toward the pasture. "That's either the saddest thing I've ever heard or the most self-aware." "Might be both." She almost smiled. "Go back inside, Mr. Caldwell. Savannah's waiting." "I know she is," he said. And then he went. 3 days later, Ethan Caldwell came back. Not with his father. Not with lawyers or bankers or the formal machinery of an arranged marriage closing. He came alone on horseback in the early morning, and he asked Harold Beaumont if he could speak with Clara. Harold stared at him. "Clara?" "Yes, sir." "My daughter Clara?" "Yes, sir." Harold Beaumont's face did 3 things in very quick succession: confusion, offense, and then a kind of uncomfortable, calculating look that Clara recognized from every financial conversation she'd ever overheard through closed doors. "Savannah is— I'd like to speak with Clara," Ethan said again. "If she's willing." Clara was in the barn. She came out with her gloves still on and looked at Ethan on his horse and then at her father's face and understood in the space of a single breath that something had shifted. "Mornin'," she said. "Morning." Ethan dismounted. "Would you show me the east pasture? I'd like to understand the property lines better." Her father sputtered. "The east, there's nothing particularly Savannah could—" "Clara," Ethan said, looking directly at her. "If you're willing." She pulled off one glove and then the other. "I'm willing." They walked the property for 2 hours. Ethan asked real questions. Not polite questions, not the kind men ask women when they want to seem interested, but the specific pointed questions of someone who actually needed to know things. About the water table, about the east fence line dispute with the Harmon property, about the cattle census and what the real numbers were versus what her father reported to the bank. And Clara answered him. All of it. Honestly. Because she had been holding those numbers alone for 3 years, and there was something in the asking that made her want to speak the truth out loud. "The ranch is carrying about 40% more debt than my father admits to," she said, standing at the east fence with the morning sun behind her. "The water lease on the North Channel expires in 8 months. If we don't renegotiate before then, we lose grazing rights on 300 acres. Ethan was quiet for the moment. "Does your father know that—" "He knows." She pulled a loose wire on the fence without looking up. "He's hoping the marriage arrangement fixes it before it becomes urgent." "Does your sister know?" Clara looked at him then. "Savannah knows she's being sold. She's just decided to be graceful about it." Something moved across Ethan's face. "That's not—" "I'm not angry at her," Clara said quickly. "She doesn't have another choice any more than she ever did. Neither of us does in this family." She paused. "But I stopped pretending a long time ago that any of this is anything other than what it is." "What is it?" he asked quietly. "Survival," she said. "Dressed up in china and candlelight." They stood there for a long moment, with the Texas wind between them and the silence full of things neither of them said yet. "What would you do?" Ethan asked. "If you could do anything." Not what's expected, not what's necessary. What would you actually do? Clara looked out at the pasture. She hadn't been asked that question in so long she had to think back to remember the last time. Maybe never. Maybe nobody had ever asked her that. I'd keep the ranch, she said finally. But I'd run it right. Renegotiate the water rights. Sell off the north acreage that we can't maintain and invest it in the southern herd. Clear the debt in 5 years, maybe 4. She paused. I'd stop pretending the numbers say something other than what they say. Ethan looked at her for a long time. You could do that, he said. You actually could. Doesn't matter, Clara said. It's not my ranch. She started walking back. It matters, he said behind her. She didn't answer. 2 weeks passed. Then the letter came. Victor Caldwell requested a formal gathering not at the Beaumont Ranch this time, but at the Caldwell estate. All of the Beaumont family. An announcement, the letter said. A celebration. Everyone understood what kind of celebration. Clara dressed in her best, which wasn't much, and sat in the Caldwell drawing room surrounded by carved furniture and velvet drapes and the quiet, suffocating air of old wealth. And she watched Savannah sit straight and still, and composed the way a person sits when they are trying very hard not to be afraid. Their mother patted Savannah's hand. Their father stared at the floor like a man counting money in his head. Victor Caldwell stood at the front of the room with a glass of bourbon and the wide, satisfied smile of a man closing a deal he'd been working toward for a year. And Ethan stood beside his father. He was wearing a jacket. His hair was combed. He looked like exactly what he was, the heir to something enormous, and Clara sat at the back of the room near the door and told herself very firmly that she was here for Savannah, that Savannah needed someone in her corner today, that whatever came next, Clara would make sure her sister at least knew she wasn't alone. I think we all know why we're gathered. Victor began, his voice filling the room, the way only the voices of very large men in very small rooms can. The Caldwell and Beaumont families have a great deal to offer one another. And when two great families find common ground, Father. The word was quiet, but it stopped Victor Caldwell mid-sentence like a wall. Ethan stepped forward. I have something to say. Victor looked at his son, the way men look at something that has just done something they didn't anticipate. Ethan. I'll say it once, Ethan said, and clearly. He turned from his father. He looked across the room. He walked past Savannah slowly, deliberately, his eyes moving with the quiet certainty of a man who had made a decision and was done renegotiating it with himself. He stopped in front of Clara. The room went so still that Clara could hear the clock on the mantel. She looked up at him. Her heart was doing something alarming that she had absolutely no intention of showing on her face. Clara Beaumont, he said, if I am going to marry anyone, it will be you. The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. And then Harold Beaumont came out of his chair so fast it scraped backward across the floor. You're choosing her! His voice was almost unrecognizable. She's not. Savannah is right there. She is exactly what you asked for. She is precisely... I asked for nothing, Ethan said, and his voice was so even it was almost frightening. This was your arrangement, and your father's. I was told what was expected of me. His eyes didn't leave Clara's face. I'm telling you now what I've decided. Clara stood up slowly. Her legs were steadier than she expected. You don't know me, she said quietly. Not really. I know you kept a ranch alive with your hands while everyone around you took credit for it, he said. I know you understand land law better than most lawyers in this county. I know you told me the truth every time I asked you a question, which is more than I can say for anyone else in either of our families. He paused. I know enough. Savannah made a small sound across the room. Not quite a cry. Something smaller than that, a sound like something breaking very quietly. Clara looked at her sister. Savannah's face was unreadable for just a moment, and then it became perfectly composed again, that practiced composure, the mask she'd been wearing since she was old enough to understand what she was being prepared for. But her eyes were wet. Savannah, Clara said. Don't, Savannah said. Not harshly, just don't. Clara looked back at Ethan. Victor Caldwell had gone a dark, dangerous color. "You will not embarrass this family in our own home." "I'm not embarrassing anyone," Ethan said. "I'm telling the truth. You raised me to believe that was a virtue. I raised you to understand responsibility. Then let me be responsible for my own choice." The two men stared at each other, and the whole room held its breath around the weight of it. Clara's father had gone very pale. He was looking at her now, really looking at her, perhaps for the first time in years, and there was something in his face she had never seen before. Not love. Not exactly. But a kind of horrified recognition, like a man realizing he threw something valuable into the fire a long time ago, and is only now watching it walk back out. "Clara," her father said. His voice was different, low, almost pleading. "You will refuse this. You will step aside and allow your sister." "No," Clara said. It was the easiest word she had ever spoken. "Clara." "No, father." The room was absolutely silent. Harold Beaumont opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Everything we've worked for, everything I've sacrificed this family needs." "This family," Clara said quietly, "has needed me to disappear for a very long time. I'm done disappearing." She looked at Ethan Caldwell. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a long moment. Her whole life on one side of a doorway. A completely unknown thing on the other. She took his hand. Her father called after her. Victor Caldwell's voice rose in the room behind her. Savannah said nothing at all. Clara walked out of that drawing room beside Ethan Caldwell and didn't look back. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because some doors, once you've walked through them, you can't afford to look back at. The night air hit her face, and she breathed it in deep and slow, and let herself feel the size of what had just happened. Her whole life, every fence she'd fixed, every calf she'd pulled from the mud, every ledger she'd balanced in secret, every night she'd sat alone in that stable, while the main house glowed warm and loud without her. All of it had led to this exact moment, on this exact step. And now she was standing in the dark beside a man she barely knew, with nothing behind her and nothing certain ahead. Ethan looked at her. "You all right?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I reckon I will be." The Texas wind moved across the dark plains, carrying with it the smell of cattle and dry grass and the particular kind of freedom that only comes from burning something down. Behind them, inside the Caldwell house, two families began their war. Nobody slept that night. Clara knew this because she could hear the house breathing. The Caldwell house, that enormous, expensive house, with its thick walls and heavy carpets, and the particular silence of a place where people were very angry and trying very hard not to show it. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the guest room they'd put her in. Not the good guest room, she understood that without being told, but the one at the end of the hall that got no morning light, and she listened to the muffled fury moving through the walls. Victor Caldwell's voice. Low, persistent, the way a river sounds before it floods. Ethan's voice. Quieter, steadier, not giving. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She had heard this conversation her whole life, just with different furniture around it. She pulled her knees to her chest and told herself very deliberately that she had made the right decision. She told herself this 3 times, the way you repeat something you're not entirely sure you believe yet. Then she lay down in her clothes because she hadn't brought anything to change into, and she stared at the ceiling until the voices stopped and the house went quiet. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, she fell into a thin, restless sleep. She was up before dawn. Old habit, the body doesn't forget. She found the kitchen by following the smell of wood smoke and found a woman already at the stove, broad-shouldered, somewhere north of 60, with the kind of face that had seen enough of life to stop being surprised by most of it. "You must be the one," the woman said without turning around. "I must be," Clara agreed. "I'm Marta. I run this kitchen." She set a cup of coffee on the table without being asked. "Sit down. You look like something the wind dragged in." Clara sat. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Is it always like this here? Marta was quiet for a moment. Like what? Loud, even when it's quiet. Marta looked at her, then a long, measuring look. You got good ears, she said finally. That'll either save you or get you killed in this house. She went back to the stove. Clara drank her coffee and didn't ask what that meant. She already understood what it meant. Ethan found her an hour later in the barn, which was where she'd gone because barns were honest places, and she needed something honest that morning. He looked like he hadn't slept at all, which she suspected was true. My father wants you gone, he said. I gathered, she said. She was running her hand along the neck of a bay gelding who kept pushing his nose against her shoulder. What do you want? I want you to stay. Those are two different things. I know what they are, Clara. She looked at him. He was leaning against the stall door with his arms crossed, and there were shadows under his eyes, and something tight around his jaw that she recognized as a man holding himself together through stubbornness alone. Tell me what happened after we left, she said. He let out a slow breath. My father offered your father a settlement, a generous one, in exchange for the understanding that the arrangement would proceed as originally planned. With Savannah. With Savannah. Clara was quiet for a moment. And my father... Ethan didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. He took it, she said. He's in a difficult position. He took it, she said again. Not angry, just clear. And Savannah, your sister didn't say anything. She sat there the whole time and didn't say a single word. He paused. That scared me more than anything else that happened last night. Clara turned that over in her mind. Savannah going silent wasn't resignation. She knew her sister better than that. Savannah going silent meant she was thinking. And Savannah thinking quietly was a different animal altogether from Savannah performing composure. Keep an eye on your father's paperwork, Clara said. Ethan blinked. What? I'm serious. If my father accepted that settlement, there's documentation. I want to see the terms. Clara, you just arrived here. My father is already half out of his mind, and the last thing I need right now... The last thing you need, she said evenly, is to find out 6 months from now that your father made promises that compromise this ranch and discover you never read what he signed. She held his gaze. I told you I don't perform. I meant it. A long silence. Then something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but something in the vicinity of one. You've been here 12 hours, he said, and I've already found 2 things that need fixing, she said. You're welcome. That afternoon, Victor Caldwell called Clara into his study. She went because refusing would have been worse, and because she wanted to see the room where that man kept his decisions. A man's study told you everything. The books he displayed without reading the documents left visible on purpose. The family portraits arranged to remind visitors of the weight they were sitting across from. Victor's study told her he was a man who had spent decades making sure everyone in any room with him understood exactly who had the most power in it. He didn't offer her a seat. She sat down anyway. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down behind his desk slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants you to appreciate the size of what he's sitting behind. I want to be honest with you, he said. I'd appreciate that, Clara said. Ethan is sentimental. He always has been. He sees something that needs saving, and he wants to save it. Victor folded his hands on the desk. That is a fine quality in a man, and a catastrophic one in a businessman. Is that what you think he's doing? Clara asked. Saving something. Aren't you? She looked at him steadily. Mr. Caldwell, I didn't ask to be chosen. I wasn't standing in that room performing anything. If your son looked across the room and decided something that's between you and him, it is between me and him, Victor said, and it will be resolved between me and him. What I'm telling you plainly is that this situation is temporary. Ethan will come to his senses. The arrangement with the Beaumont girl will proceed, and you... He paused, studying her. You are a practical woman, I can see that. Practical women understand when the sensible thing is to step aside gracefully. Clara was quiet for a moment. "And if I don't?" she said. Victor smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Then things become more complicated for everyone involved, including your family." There it was. Clean and plain the way threats are when the person making them doesn't need to dress them up. Clara stood up. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I have spent my entire life being told to step aside gracefully. I have spent my entire life making myself smaller so that everyone around me could feel larger." She picked up her gloves from the arm of the chair. "I reckon I'm done with graceful." She left before he could answer. Her hands were shaking slightly in the hallway. She pressed them flat against her sides and kept walking. She made it to the end of the corridor before Marta appeared from a side door, looked at her face and said, "Kitchen, now." Clara followed her. Marta put a plate of food on the table that Clara hadn't asked for and sat down across from her and said without preamble, "He said the thing about graceful stepping, didn't he?" Clara stared at her. "Does he say that often?" "He said it to Ethan's mother once," Marta said. Her voice went flat. Back when she started asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask. Something cold moved through Clara's chest. "What kind of questions?" Marta looked at her for a long time. Then she got up and went back to the stove. "Eat your food," she said. "You're going to need your strength." She didn't say anything else. But the silence she left behind was the kind that had weight to it. The kind that was full of things not yet said. Clara ate. She thought about Ethan's mother. She thought about the word questions. She thought about what kind of questions a woman in this house might ask that would make a man like Victor Caldwell tell her to step aside gracefully. She filed it away. She was very good at filing things away. 3 days passed, and the Caldwell house ran on tension, the way other houses ran on firewood. Constant consuming, keeping everything at the exact temperature of almost unbearable. Victor was coldly civil. The servants watched Clara with careful eyes. Ethan moved through the house like a man waiting for something to detonate. And Clara learned the ranch, not because anyone invited her to, but because she woke up every morning and walked out the door and found something that needed understanding, and she understood it. The southern pastures fence line. The water management system that was more complicated than it looked on paper. The account ledgers that Ethan let her see after the second day over his father's objections, because she had asked directly and he'd said yes, and Victor had walked out of the room rather than argue in front of her. She was sitting with those ledgers the afternoon the writer came. Fast. Writing too hard for anything good. Ethan met the man in the yard before Clara reached the window. She watched the exchange, the writer handing over a folded paper, Ethan reading it the particular way his shoulders dropped. That meant something had gone wrong in a direction he hadn't expected. He came inside and found her in the study with the ledgers. "It's your sister," he said. Clara was on her feet before he finished the sentence. "What happened?" "Your father's moved the arrangement forward, faster than anyone expected." He handed her the paper. "The marriage is being announced at the end of the month." Clara read the letter. It was from a Caldwell lawyer, one of Victor's men, which meant Victor already knew, which meant Victor had probably encouraged it. "Who is he?" she asked. Her voice was very controlled. "His name is Douglas Hale. He's—" Ethan stopped. "Tell me." "He's 53. He's been married twice. Both wives died young. The rumors about why are—" He stopped again. "They're bad rumors, Clara." The letter shook once in her hands. Then she set it on the desk very carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you're not deliberate about it. "Savannah is 22 years old," she said. "I know. My father is selling her to a man with dead wives and bad rumors, because I walked out and took his good deal with me." She looked up at him. "This is because of me." "This is because of your father," Ethan said firmly. "Don't do that. Don't make it tidy." He was quiet. "I have to go to her," Clara said. "Your father won't let you in the house." "I didn't ask if my father would let me." She was already moving toward the door when Ethan caught her arm not to stop her, but the way you catch someone who's walking toward a fire because you intend to walk with them. "I'll ride with you," he said. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." They rode hard, and the whole way Clara turned the thing over in her head, the timeline, the math of it, the way her father had moved so fast that it could only mean one thing. He had panicked. The settlement from Victor had bought him breathing room, but not enough. There was more debt than she'd known about. There had to be, or he wouldn't be running toward Douglas Hale this desperately. She had left. She had taken the Caldwell arrangement with her. And her father, stripped of options, had reached for the worst one he had. Because of her. She knew that wasn't entirely true. She knew that in the deepest, clearest part of herself. Her father had been moving toward this kind of desperation for years. She was not the cause. She was the final push. But knowing a thing and feeling a thing were two entirely separate conversations. They arrived at the Beaumont Ranch just before dark. Her father met them on the porch. He looked older than he had 3 days ago, diminished somehow, the way men look when the performance they've been maintaining finally costs them something they can't get back. "You're not welcome here," he said to Clara. But his voice had lost its conviction. It was the voice of a man who knew he'd done something that couldn't be undone, and was hoping anger could cover it. "I want to see Savannah," Clara said. "Savannah has nothing to say to you." "Then let her say it herself." A long moment. Behind her father, the front door opened. Savannah stood in the doorway. She was wearing a yellow dress that Clara didn't recognize, something new, probably purchased for the announcement. Her hair was done beautifully. She looked exactly the way a woman is supposed to look when everyone around her has decided her life for her, and dressed her up to make the decision look pretty. Her eyes found Clara's, and they were not the eyes of a woman who had nothing to say. They were the eyes of a woman who had been thinking very quietly and very hard for 3 days. "Papa," Savannah said, "let her in." Harold Beaumont looked at his younger daughter. Something passed between them, that specific current between parents and children who have spent years pretending a thing that both of them know isn't true, and then he stepped aside. Clara walked into her father's house. It felt completely different than it ever had. She could not have explained why. Nothing had changed, the same furniture, the same curtains, the same lamp by the staircase that had needed a new wick for 3 years. But she walked through the door as herself, which she wasn't sure she had ever done before, and that made the whole house look like a different place entirely. Savannah led her to the back sitting room and closed the door. They looked at each other. "Douglas Hale," Clara said. "Yes." "Savannah." "I know what the rumors are," Savannah said. Her voice was steady in a way that made Clara's chest hurt. "Papa told me they were exaggerated. I know they're not." "Then you can't—" "I don't have a choice." The words came out clean and flat, and practiced like something she'd said to herself so many times, they'd lost their edges. Then her composure cracked just barely, just at the seam, and underneath it, Clara saw the thing Savannah never showed anyone. The fear. Raw and real, and the same fear Clara had felt her whole life, just shaped differently by a different kind of captivity. "You had a choice," Savannah said. And now there was something else in her voice. Not blame, not quite, but something that was looking for a place to land. "You walked out that door, and I know," Clara said. "I'm not angry at you." "I know that too." Savannah pressed her hands together in her lap. "What do I do?" Clara looked at her sister, at the yellow dress and the careful hair and the 22-year-old woman inside all of it, who had been raised to believe that being beautiful was enough protection. That if you were lovely and graceful and pleasant, the world would treat you accordingly. And the world was currently disproving that theory as efficiently as it could. "You're not marrying Douglas Hale," Clara said. "Clara, you're not." She said it with such flat certainty that Savannah blinked. "I don't know exactly how we stop it yet, but you are not marrying that man." Savannah stared at her. "You've never said anything like that to me before," she said softly. "No." Clara agreed. I haven't. They looked at each other across the small room, two women who had grown up in the same house and been handed entirely different lives inside it, and something shifted between them that had needed shifting for a very long time. Outside the door, Clara heard her father's footsteps in the hallway. Pacing. The sound of a man who had run out of good options and was currently surveying the bad ones. And somewhere deeper in her mind, behind the immediate urgency of Savannah and the Douglas Hale problem and the Caldwell War and all the fires burning on all sides, a quieter thought was taking shape. Marta's voice. He said it to Ethan's mother once, back when she started asking questions she wasn't supposed to ask. What questions? What answers? And why had Ethan's mother stopped asking them? Clara filed it away again, deep and careful, in the part of her mind where she kept the things that mattered most. She would come back to it. She always came back. They rode back to the Caldwell Ranch in the dark, and neither of them spoke much, which was the kind of silence that meant both people were thinking hard about different parts of the same problem. Clara was thinking about Savannah, about the yellow dress, about the way her sister had said, "I don't have a choice," with such practiced flatness that it had clearly stopped feeling like a sentence and started feeling like a fact. Ethan was thinking about something else. She could tell by the set of his jaw and the way he held the reins loose but not relaxed, the way a man holds something when his mind is somewhere far ahead of his hands. "What aren't you telling me?" she said. He glanced over. "I was going to wait until we were inside." "Tell me now." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Douglas Hale isn't a coincidence." Clara waited. "He's one of my father's associates. Has been for 15 years. They've done land deals together. Water rights negotiations." He kept his eyes on the road. "My father recommended him to your father. Personally." The night air suddenly felt much colder than it had a moment before. "Your father," Clara said slowly, "arranged for my sister to be sold to one of his own men." "After I disrupted the original arrangement, yes." Ethan's voice was tight. "Hale has been trying to absorb the Beaumont water rights for 2 years. Marrying Savannah gives him access to the property legally. And your father gets a grateful associate, a water corridor he's been trying to control for a decade, and you and me gone from the picture." Clara thought about that. She thought about it very carefully, the way she thought about ledger numbers, when they weren't adding up, tracking each figure back to its source until the pattern became visible. "Your father didn't just react to what happened in that drawing room," she said. "He already had this ready." Ethan said nothing. "He had Hale waiting," she said, "in case the Beaumont arrangement fell through for any reason." "I believe so. Which means he never actually needed Savannah specifically. He needed the Beaumont land. Any legal connection to it would do." "Yes." Clara sat with that for the rest of the ride. The anger in her chest was very clean and very cold, which was the kind of anger she had learned to trust most. The hot kind made you loud. The cold kind made you precise. Marta was still up when they came in. She looked at Clara's face and set coffee on the table without a word. "Marta," Clara said, sitting down. "Tell me about Ethan's mother." The kitchen went very still. Marta looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Clara. Then he sat down too, which Clara understood to mean he wanted to hear this as much as she did. "Her name was Ellen," Marta said finally. She kept her back to them, her hands busy at the counter in the way hands get busy when a person needs something to do while they say a hard thing. "She was from Georgia, came out here when she married Victor. She was 20, he was 32, thought she was marrying ambition." A pause. "She wasn't wrong. She just didn't understand what kind." "What did she find out?" Clara asked. Marta was quiet for so long that Clara thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, she found the contracts. "What contracts?" "The ones that explained how the Caldwell Ranch got so big so fast." Marta turned around. Her face was very careful, the face of a woman who had kept a thing locked up for a long time and was checking the weight of it before deciding whether to set it down. "Victor didn't build this empire by being smarter or harder working than other men. He built it by making sure other men couldn't compete. bribing water officials, filing false land claims, forging signatures on transfer documents. Ethan had gone completely still. She found proof, Clara said. She started collecting it. Letters, contracts, ledger records. Marta folded her hands. She told me once she was going to take it to the county judge. She never did, Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. She died 3 weeks after she told me that, Marta said. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped back. What are you saying? I'm saying she fell from a horse she'd ridden 100 times, on a trail she knew like her own hands. Marta met his eyes steadily. I'm saying she was 34 years old and perfectly healthy. And I'm saying that after she died, Victor spent 2 days in her room alone, before he let anyone else in. She paused. And after that, whatever she'd been collecting was gone. The word gone landed in the room like a stone dropping into still water. Ethan put both hands flat on the table. He didn't say anything. Clara watched his face do something complicated and painful, the particular expression of a person whose understanding of their own history is being rewritten while they're still sitting inside it. Marta, he said finally, are you telling me my father? I'm telling you what I know, Marta said. I'm not telling you what I can prove. She untied her apron. But I'll tell you this. Ellen was careful. She was the most careful woman I ever met. She folded the apron neatly. Careful enough that I don't believe she hid everything in one place. She set the apron on the counter and walked out. Clara and Ethan sat in the kitchen for a long time after she left. Say something, Clara said quietly. I don't know what to say. Then just breathe. That's enough for right now. He looked at her. There was something raw in his face that he wasn't trying to hide, which told her that he was past the point of managing how he appeared. If what she's implying is true, then this ranch is built on stolen ground, Clara said. And innocent families lost everything to build it. She held his gaze. Including mine. That hit him. She could see it. Your water rights, he said slowly. The North Channel lease. The one that expires in 8 months, Clara said. The one with terms so disadvantageous it almost looked designed to fail. She watched his face. Who drew up that lease, Ethan? He closed his eyes. My father's lawyer, he said. 3 years ago. There it was. Clean and plain and terrible. Clara stood up. I need some air. She went outside and stood in the dark and let the night settle around her. The stars were enormous out here, the way they always were in Texas, not comfort exactly, but scale, the kind of scale that reminded you that most of the things you were afraid of were in the long view quite small. This did not feel small. She heard the door behind her. I'm not asking you to forgive him, Ethan said. Good, because I can't right now. I'm not asking you to stay either. If you want to leave, I'm not leaving. She said it before she'd fully decided it, but as soon as it was out, she understood it was true. Because if I leave, nothing changes. Your father goes on doing what he's doing. Savannah ends up with Douglas Hale, and every family your father ruined stays ruined. She turned around. I'm not built for leaving. He looked at her for a long moment in the dark. Neither am I, he said. I just don't know where to start. We start with finding what your mother hid. They started that night. It took 4 days. 4 days of careful, systematic searching, not tearing the house apart, which would have told Victor something was happening, but working slowly through the spaces a careful woman might use. Clara thought about Ellen Caldwell constantly during those 4 days. She thought about who she must have been, young and far from home, and married to a man whose ambitions turned out to be a different animal than she'd understood. She thought about the courage it took to start collecting evidence against your own husband in a house where he owned everything, including the doors. She thought, I know what that looks like. I know what it costs. On the 4th night she found it, not where she expected, not hidden in floorboards or behind paintings like in the stories. It was in the root cellar, inside an old tin flower box, inside a hollow space in the stone foundation that you would only find if you were specifically looking for it or specifically thinking like a woman who had run out of safer options. A bundle of letters. Folded contracts. A ledger small and careful with Ellen Caldwell's handwriting covering every page. Clara sat down on the cold stone floor and read. By the time she came upstairs an hour later, her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Everything about her was very, very steady. She found Ethan in the study. She set the bundle on the desk between them. He didn't reach for it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something you know is going to change things before you open it. How bad, he asked. 15 families, Clara said. Over 12 years. False claims, forged signatures, bribed officials. The Garrison family, the ones I told your father about at dinner, they weren't careless with their water rights. She paused. They were stolen from, deliberately. Anyone else you recognize? The Beaumont North Channel, she said. Page 11. He opened the ledger to page 11. She watched him read it. She watched his face go through everything it needed to go through: disbelief, then recognition, then the particular shame of a man realizing that something done in his name was done without his knowledge, but not without his benefit. Clara. I know, she said. This isn't I didn't. I know Ethan. He pressed his hands flat on the ledger. What do we do with this? We hold on to it, she said. For now, carefully. The door to the study opened. Victor Caldwell walked in. He saw the ledger. The change in his face was immediate and total, like watching a mask slip off something that had been wearing it for a very long time. For just a second, underneath the composure and the authority and the practiced confidence of a man who had spent decades winning, there was something else. Something that looked almost like fear. Where did you find that? He said. Not a question. His voice had a new quality to it, flat and careful. The voice of a man measuring the distance between himself and the thing he was looking at. Your wife hid it well, Clara said. She was a thorough woman. Victor looked at Ethan. Give it to me. No, Ethan said. Ethan, that document contains private. It contains the names of 15 families you ruined, Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. It contains proof of fraud, forgery, and bribery of 3 county officials. A pause. It contains what happened to the Beaumont water rights. Victor's jaw tightened. You don't understand the complexity of how land acquisition... Don't, Ethan said. The single word had enough weight in it to stop his father cold. Don't explain it to me like it's business strategy. Not right now. Victor turned to Clara. And something shifted in his expression. Something that was past threat and into something more honest and therefore more dangerous. You have no idea what you've opened. I have a fairly good idea, Clara said. This will destroy this ranch, everything I built, everything Ethan stands to inherit. Everything you stole, Clara said. People will come after us. Lawyers, politicians, families who have been waiting for an excuse. They have more than an excuse now, Clara said. They have evidence. Victor stared at her. Then, and this surprised her, he laughed, a short, humorless sound. You walked into my house 6 days ago, 6 days, and you think you understand what you're holding. I understand exactly what I'm holding, Clara said. The question is, what we choose to do with it. We, Victor repeated. The word sat in his mouth like something foreign. There is no we, girl. There is me and there is my son, and there is a document that needs to disappear before... The sound of a horse in the yard stopped him. Then voices. Then the housekeeper's quick footsteps in the hall. Then a knock on the study door that had an urgency to it. Sir, the housekeeper said, opening the door a crack. There's a young woman at the door. She says her name is Savannah Beaumont. She says she's not going home. The 3 of them looked at each other. Clara moved first. She was already in the hallway before Victor could say anything, already at the front door, and when she opened it, Savannah was standing on the Caldwell porch in a traveling coat with a carpetbag at her feet, and red eyes that had clearly been crying for some time and were done with it now. "I'm not marrying Douglas Hale," Savannah said. "No," Clara agreed. "You're not. Papa is furious. I expect so. He told me if I left, I was no longer his daughter." Savannah's chin came up. The gesture was so familiar, that particular lift of the Beaumont chin, that both sisters had inherited and used differently, that Clara felt something crack open in her chest. "So I left." Clara stepped aside and let her sister in. Behind her, she heard Victor Caldwell's voice in the hallway, low, controlled, and burning with the particular fury of a man watching the situation he carefully constructed come apart faster than he can hold it together. But ahead of her, Savannah was already inside, and inside Clara's coat pocket, pressed flat against her ribs, was a dead woman's ledger containing 15 years of truth. The threats started the next morning. A letter, anonymous, slipped under the front door sometime before dawn. Clara found it when she came down for coffee. "We know what you found. Burn it, or we burn something you care about." She read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, put the coffee on. When Ethan came downstairs, she handed it to him without a word. He read it, looked up at her. "Someone inside this house. Or someone watching it," she said. "Someone who knew we found the ledger last night." "Only 3 people knew." "4," Clara said. "The housekeeper was at the door." Ethan folded the letter. "Are you afraid?" Clara thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "But I've been afraid my whole life. I just used to be afraid of much smaller things." She picked up her coffee. "And this time I have something worth being afraid for." Outside, the first pale light was pushing over the Texas plains. And somewhere out beyond the fence line, the thing that had been building for 15 years was finally waking up and learning that it had been found. The second threat came on the 3rd day. Not a letter this time. The east fence, a quarter mile of it, burned to ash overnight. They found it at dawn, still smoking cattle scattered across the neighboring property. And nailed to the one post that hadn't burned a single piece of paper with 2 words on it. Last warning. Clara stood at that fence with the smoke still rising around her ankles and looked at the damage with the cold measuring eye of a woman who had spent too many years repairing things other people broke. "They expected us to panic," she said. Ethan stood beside her. "Did it work?" "No." She turned around. "It made me angry. That's different." Savannah was behind them. She had been quiet since she arrived, not the practiced quiet of performance, but the genuine quiet of someone reorganizing their understanding of the world from the inside out. She looked at the burned fence, and then at Clara, and said, "What do? We move faster," Clara said, "before they do something worse." Back at the house, Clara spread Ellen Caldwell's ledger on the kitchen table, alongside the anonymous letters and the records she'd pulled from the Caldwell account books over the past week. Savannah sat across from her. Ethan stood at the window. "The ledger is damning, but it's not enough on its own," Clara said. "Ellen's handwriting. Victor will say it's fabricated. We need corroboration." "From who?" Ethan said. "From the families." She looked up. "The Garrisons, the Harmons, the Perrys, everyone named in this ledger. If even half of them still have their original contracts, their original deed records, their original water agreements, we can build something a judge can't ignore. Clara, these families have been beaten down for years. They're not going to step forward against Victor Caldwell on the word of his son," Clara said. "And his son's evidence. And his son standing in the same room with them." Ethan looked at her. "You have to be there," she said. "You understand that. This doesn't work without you in the room." The silence that followed had a particular texture to it. The texture of a man deciding whether he was willing to burn down the thing he was standing inside. "I know," he said quietly. "I need to hear you say it clearly." He turned from the window. "I'll be in the room." Savannah looked at her sister. "And me." "You," Clara said, "are going to help me write the letters." They worked through the night. Clara drafted. Savannah copied her handwriting better than Clara's even more trustworthy looking on paper, which was one of the few advantages of having been raised to be decorative. By morning, they had 11 letters ready, each one addressed to a family named in the ledger. Each one explaining what had been found and asking for a meeting at the Crawford County Courthouse in 2 weeks' time. Ethan sent riders out before breakfast. Victor Caldwell watched all of it from the edges of the house. He said nothing for 2 days, just watched the way a man watches when he's calculating whether intervention will help or accelerate the thing he's afraid of. On the third day, he came to Clara. She was in the study cross-referencing the ledger against county land records she'd had brought from the courthouse archive. Victor came in and sat down across from her without being invited, which told her he had stopped performing confidence and was now actually worried. "Stop," he said. Clara kept writing. "No. I'm asking you as—" "You're not asking me as anything," she said. "We don't have a relationship that allows you to ask me for favors, Mr. Caldwell." Victor put both hands on the desk. "You will destroy this family." Clara put down her pen and looked at him directly for the first time since the study confrontation. She looked at him the way she looked at ledgers that weren't adding up, searching for where the real number was hiding. What she saw surprised her. He was afraid. Not the calculated fear of a man managing risk. The genuine private fear of a man who had built a fortress and was finally understanding that the walls he built to keep people out also had him trapped inside. "You already destroyed it," she said. But her voice was quieter than she expected. "You destroyed it 15 years ago when you decided that building something real was too slow and too uncertain. You destroyed it when you decided Ellen's questions were more dangerous than your secrets." Victor flinched. It was slight. She almost missed it. "You loved her," Clara said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "That's none of your—" "I'm not saying it as a weapon. I'm saying it because it matters." She leaned forward slightly. "Whatever you did to protect what you built, I don't think you started out intending for it to end the way it ended. I don't think you intended any of it." She paused. "But it happened. And those families are still living with what happened. And your son is living with what happened." Victor looked at the ledger on the desk. "If this comes out," he said, "I lose everything." "Yes," Clara said. "The ranch, the land, everything Ethan was supposed to inherit." "Yes." "And you're willing to do that to him? The man you—" He stopped. "The man I what?" Victor looked at her. Something shifted in his face, something old and tired, and maybe underneath all the armor, something honest. "The man you clearly care about." Clara was quiet for a moment. "What Ethan inherits from this point forward will be real," she said. "It'll be smaller. It'll be harder. But it'll be his. Built on ground that nobody else bled for." She picked up her pen. "That's worth more than an empire built on stolen water." Victor stood up slowly. He looked older than he had the first night she'd met him, like something had gone out of him that had been keeping him upright. He walked to the door, stopped. "Ellen would have liked you," he said. He didn't turn around. Then he left. Clara sat very still for a moment after the door closed. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. The meeting was set for a Tuesday. 9 of the 11 families responded. 9 families who had spent years swallowing losses and signing documents they didn't fully understand, and watching their land shrink while the Caldwell empire grew, and who had mostly stopped hoping that the accounting would ever be corrected. The Crawford County Courthouse had a public meeting room that could hold about 60 people. By the time Clara and Ethan arrived, there were over 80 ranchers, their wives a handful of lawyers, 2 local newspaper men, and 3 county politicians who had gotten wind of something significant and shown up to either support it or contain it, depending on how the wind blew. Clara stood at the back of the room while it filled and told herself to breathe. Savannah appeared at her elbow. "You should be at the front." "Not yet." "Clara." "I need to see who came," Clara said. "And why?" She was looking at the 3 politicians. One of them, a heavy-set man with a county commissioner's badge and the particular look of someone who had received a very alarming letter this week, kept glancing toward the door like he was calculating exits. "That man," Clara said quietly, "is in the ledger." Savannah followed her gaze. "What do we do?" "Nothing yet. Let him sit with it." Ethan came in last, and the room's energy shifted when he did the particular shift that happens when the person everyone has been waiting for arrives and turns out to be real. He looked the way Clara had come to understand he looked when he was past deciding and fully committed. Quiet, steady, slightly pale, like a man walking into something he can't walk back out of. He found her eyes across the room. She nodded. He walked to the front. The room settled. "My name is Ethan Caldwell," he said. "Most of you know who my father is. Most of you have done business with him, or tried to, or been on the wrong end of something he wanted." He paused. "I asked you here because you deserve to know the truth about how the Caldwell Ranch was built, and because the families in this room are owed something that's long overdue." The silence was absolute. 12 years ago, my father began a systematic process of acquiring land and water rights throughout this county using methods that were not legal. He said it plainly without softening it. Forged transfer documents, bribed officials, false claims filed with the county land office. He set the ledger on the table in front of him. "My mother discovered this. She documented it. She died before she could bring it forward." The room broke open. Not all at once in waves the way a crowd reacts when something enormous is confirmed rather than revealed, because most of the people in that room had suspected for years and spent years being told their suspicions were bitterness. The sound of confirmed truth in a room full of people who've been carrying a wound is not a quiet sound. The county commissioner was on his feet. This is slander. This is libel. You can't stand in a public building and make accusations without—" "Sit down," said a rancher from the left side of the room. A lean, weathered man named Garrison, who hadn't spoken yet, but whose voice when he used it had the particular weight of someone who had been waiting a very long time for permission. "Sit down and let the man finish." The commissioner sat down. Ethan laid out the evidence methodically. Each family, each transaction, the dates, the amounts, the names of the officials involved. He was not emotional about it. Clara had asked him not to be because emotion could be dismissed and facts couldn't, and he had understood her and done exactly as she'd asked. Clara came forward when it was time. "My name is Clara Beaumont," she said. "The Beaumont North water lease is on page 11 of that ledger. The terms were written by a Caldwell lawyer to expire at a point that would leave the Beaumont Ranch legally vulnerable." She looked at the room. "I have compared the original Beaumont lease documents against the county records. The signature on the transfer agreement is not my grandfather's. It was forged." The room erupted again. 3 voices at once, then 5. The newspaper men were writing so fast, their hands were blurs. Through all of it, Clara watched the county commissioner. He had gone a gray-green color and was very still with the particular stillness of a man who has just realized that the thing he accepted payment to make disappear has reappeared in front of 80 people. She walked to him through the noise of the room. She stood in front of him and waited until he looked at her. "Page 23, she said quietly. "Your signature is on page 23 of the ledger, cross-referenced with a payment record from the Caldwell account books, April of 1891. He opened his mouth. "You have 2 choices," Clara said. "You cooperate with the investigation fully and completely, or the newspaper men in this room get page 23 tonight." His mouth closed. "I'd recommend the first one," she said. She walked back to the front of the room. What happened over the next 6 hours was the most exhausting thing Clara had ever participated in. Lawyers arrived. Arguments erupted and were resolved and erupted again. 3 men tried to leave and were persuaded to stay. The newspaper men filled 4 notebooks between them. And through all of it, Victor Caldwell sat in the back of the room. Clara had not known he was coming. He had not told anyone he was coming. He had simply appeared sometime in the 2nd hour and taken a seat in the last row, and sat there with his hands folded and his face unreadable, while his son dismantled the empire he had spent his life constructing. At one point, one of the ranchers stood and pointed at Victor directly. He should answer for this himself, not just his son, him. The room agreed loudly. Everyone looked at Victor Caldwell. Victor sat very still. Clara watched him from across the room. She watched him look at the ledger on the table. She watched him look at Ethan. She watched him look at the faces of the families he had spent 12 years diminishing, the Garrisons and the Harmons and the Perrys and all the rest of them. Older now, worn down in the particular way that years of fighting something larger than yourself wears a person down. He stood up. The room went quiet. Victor Caldwell walked to the front. He stood beside his son. He looked at the people in the room for a long moment. His jaw was working with the effort of something very large trying to get out through a very small door. "Everything in that ledger is accurate," he said. The room erupted one final time. The land acquisitions were fraudulent. The water agreements were manipulated. The officials were paid. His voice didn't break, but it was not the voice of the man who had told Clara to step aside gracefully. Something fundamental had changed in it. "My wife tried to expose this. She died before she could." He stopped. "I will not dishonor what she tried to do by protecting myself at the expense of these families any further." Ethan stood beside his father and didn't touch him. Didn't need to. Their presence, side by side, said the thing that needed to be said without words. Clara stood at the edge of the room and felt the thing she'd been carrying for weeks begin very slowly, very cautiously to loosen. Not forgiveness. Not yet. That was a longer road. But something. Savannah appeared beside her. Neither of them spoke. They stood together and watched the room. Watched Victor answer questions in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who had put down something very heavy, and found that the relief and the grief of it were almost identical. And for the first time in their lives, the Beaumont sisters stood somewhere together and both of them belonged there. The weeks that followed moved fast and brutal. Investors pulled out before the ink was dry on the newspaper stories. The Caldwell Ranch accounts were frozen pending investigation. 2 of the bribed officials resigned. 1 tried to flee to New Mexico and was brought back. Half the Caldwell land was put into receivership to begin the process of compensating the families who could prove their claims. It was complicated and imperfect, and some families got more than they deserved, and some got less, which was the nature of justice when it arrived late. The ranch shrank. The empire, the enormous, intimidating thing that Victor had spent his life building, came apart the way things built on bad foundations always eventually do, not all at once, but steadily, piece by piece, each piece falling with a weight that echoed. Victor Caldwell became a different man in that time. Smaller. Quieter. Not broken exactly. Clara wasn't sure Victor Caldwell was capable of breaking in the simple way, but fundamentally altered. Like something in him that had been wound very tight for a very long time had finally been allowed to unwind. One evening, 3 weeks after the courthouse meeting, Clara found him sitting outside by himself in the last of the daylight, which was something she had never seen him do. Victor Caulfield sitting still without purpose. She sat down nearby, not beside him, but close enough that the silence was shared. After a while he said, "She would have been glad it came out." "Yes," Clara said. "She would have. I told myself for years it was to protect Ethan, the ranch, the future." He was quiet. "It was to protect myself. I knew that then. I just got very good at not knowing it." Clara didn't answer immediately. The light was fading across the Texas plains, long and gold and indifferent to all human accounting. "The families are still alive," she said finally. "Most of them. They still have their land, or they're getting it back. There's something left to build from." She paused. "That's not nothing." Victor looked at her. "You're a very hard woman to hate." "I'm aware," Clara said. "It frustrates people." Something passed across Victor Caldwell's face that in a different man she might have called a smile. She stood up. There was still work to do. There was always still work to do. But for the first time since she'd walked out of that drawing room with her hand in Ethan's, the work felt like it was building toward something rather than just holding something back. And that, she thought, was the difference between surviving and beginning. The beginning, it turned out, looked a lot like hard work. Not the grinding, thankless kind Clara had grown up with, the kind where you pour everything you have into something that belongs to someone else, and wake up the next morning to do it again, while the someone else takes credit for your survival. This was different. This was the kind of hard work that had her name on it. That had Ethan's name beside hers. That had Savannah's handwriting in the account books, and Marta's voice in the kitchen, and the slow, stubborn rebuilding of something from the ground up, which is always harder and always more real than inheriting something already built. The Caldwell Ranch, what remained of it after the receivership, was a third of what it had been. Clara had walked the remaining property on a cold January morning 3 months after the courthouse meeting with a map in one hand and Ellen Caldwell's ledger in the other, and she had looked at what was left with the same clear eyes she had brought to the Beaumont books years ago. No performance, no sentiment. Just numbers and ground, and the honest question of what could be made from what remained. "Tell me what you see," Ethan said beside her. "I see a ranch that's been stripped of everything that was stolen and kept everything that was earned," she said, "which means what's left is actually worth something." That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one. She folded the map. The south pasture alone can carry 300 head if we manage the grazing rotation properly. The water on the west channel is clean, and the rights are legitimate, your grandfather's, not your father's, and we own the land outright. She looked at him. Most ranchers in Texas are carrying debt they can't see over. We're not. We're also carrying about 40 employees who aren't sure they still have jobs, he said. Then let's go tell them they do. They held a meeting with the ranch hands that afternoon, all of them gathered in the main yard in the January cold, hats in hands, faces carefully neutral, with the particular neutrality of people waiting to hear which direction bad news is coming from. Ethan spoke first. He told them the truth about what had happened. All of it plainly without softening. He told them the empire was gone, and what was left was smaller, and that anyone who wanted to leave could leave with a full month's wages and no hard feelings. Nobody left. Then Clara stood up and told them how the ranch was going to run going forward. Wages paid on time every time. A percentage of profits distributed to the hands at year end, a thing unheard of in Texas ranching in 1898, and met initially with the kind of silence that meant people were trying to figure out the catch. There was no catch. Clara explained the accounting logic behind it. Workers with a stake in the outcome worked harder, made better decisions, stayed longer. It wasn't charity, it was efficiency. A hand named Robles, who had been with the ranch for 11 years and had the weather-beaten face of a man who had heard many speeches and believed almost none of them, raised his hand. "Miss Clara," he said, "you're serious." "I'm always serious about numbers," she said. Robles looked at the man next to him, then back at Clara. "All right then," he said. "Let's get to work." Spring came and the south herd grew. Summer came and the pasture rotation held. By fall, the numbers Clara had mapped out in January were matching the numbers in the ledger, which was the most satisfying thing she knew, a plan becoming a fact. Savannah stayed. This had not been entirely certain in the early months. Savannah had arrived at the Caldwell Ranch in a traveling coat with a carpet bag, and a decision made from desperation as much as courage, and the question of what she was going to do with herself once the immediate crisis was over remained open for some time. She started with the account books, not because Clara asked her to, but because one afternoon she picked up the ledger Clara had left on the kitchen table and started reading it the way she'd once read sheet music, methodically following the patterns, looking for the places where something was off. She had a natural eye for it that neither of them had known was there, probably because nobody had ever handed Savannah a ledger before. She'd been handed sheet music and French grammar and instructions for how to pour tea correctly, and her mathematical mind had been politely ignored for 22 years. "This supplier," she said one evening, holding the page up, "we're overpaying by 12% compared to the Henderson Ranch's rate for the same feed." Clara looked at the page. "You're right. I've been right about 3 of them." Savannah set the ledger down. "I've been doing this for 2 weeks, and I've found us enough savings to repair the east barn." Clara looked at her sister for a long moment. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I wanted to be sure," Savannah said. I didn't want to walk in here and be wrong and have everyone look at me the way people have always looked at me. Like you're decorative. Yes. Savannah, Clara said, you have never been just decorative. Papa made you believe that because it was useful to him. Savannah was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone feeling something true for the first time. Show me the rest, Clara said. All 4 suppliers, tonight. They worked until midnight, and when they were done, Savannah had found savings significant enough that Clara sat back in her chair and looked at her sister with the expression of a woman recalibrating something she thought she already understood. You're better at this than I am, Clara said. No, I'm not. At the pattern recognition, the pricing structures. You're better. She said it plainly. I'm telling you that because it's true, and because you should know it. Savannah picked up the ledger and looked at it and didn't say anything for a while. But something had shifted in her face. Something that had been braced against the world for a long time began very carefully to unbrace. I want to learn the rest, she said finally. The legal side, the land documents, the water rights. Then learn it. Will you teach me? Every bit of it, Clara said. Their father came in October. Harold Beaumont arrived on a Tuesday morning, looking like a man who had rehearsed an apology so many times it had gone smooth and a little worn, like a stone that's been carried too long. He stood in the front yard of the Caldwell Ranch, the smaller, quieter ranch it had become, and when Clara opened the door, he took off his hat with both hands and held it in front of him. I'd like to speak with both my daughters, he said. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped aside. She got Savannah from the study. The 3 of them sat in the front room, which had less furniture in it than it used to, but felt somehow more like a real room because of that. Harold Beaumont looked at his hands. I handled things poorly, he said, for a long time. Neither sister said anything. I treated you. He stopped, started again. I treated you as a means to an end, Clara, both of you. I told myself I was doing what was necessary for the family. I know now that I was doing what was easy for me. He looked up. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. I wanted you to know that I know. Clara looked at her father. She looked at him the way she looked at difficult accounts all the way through past the surface to where the real numbers lived. What she saw was a small man who had made himself smaller by the choices he'd made and was only now beginning to understand the full cost. I don't have forgiveness to give you yet, she said. That's honest. Harold nodded. But I don't have hatred either, she said. That's also honest. Savannah said very quietly, Come back at Christmas, Papa. We'll have you to dinner. Harold Beaumont put his hat back on with hands that weren't entirely steady. He stood up. He looked at his daughters, both of them together, in a room something he had spent years preventing by pitting them against each other, and he seemed to understand in that moment what he'd cost himself by doing it. He left without saying anything else. Sometimes that was the most honest thing a person could do. Victor Caldwell had a small room at the back of the house now. Not the master bedroom, he had given that up without being asked, which surprised everyone and said more than an explanation would have. He took meals with the family sometimes and spent other days mostly alone, which Clara had come to understand was how grief worked in a man who had never learned to carry it in company. She found him one evening sitting with a letter in his hands, old paper, the edges soft with handling. Ellen's? She asked. One I didn't know about, he said. Marta found it in a coat pocket. From about a month before. He stopped. She wrote it to Ethan, for when he was older. Clara sat down. She knew, Victor said. His voice was very quiet. She knew what might happen. She wrote him a letter telling him who he was, not who I told him he was. He folded the letter carefully. She said he had her father's conscience and her grandfather's stubbornness, and that those 2 things together would make him either the best man in Texas or the most aggravating. Clara almost smiled. She wasn't wrong. Victor looked at her. She would have liked what you've built here. You've said that before. I mean it more each time. He set the letter on the table. I spend a great deal of time thinking about what she was trying to do, and whether if I had let her things might have gone differently. They would have, Clara said. Not cruelly, just clearly. Yes. He didn't flinch from it. I know. She stood up to leave. He said, Clara. She waited. Thank you, he said, for not letting Ethan protect me, for making him stand in that room. She looked at him for a moment. That was his choice, not mine. It was both, Victor said. Don't undersell yourself. Ellen never did. She left him with his letter and his long reckoning and went to find her husband. 3 years passed. The ranch ran clean and honest and smaller than it had been, and the numbers told a story Clara trusted because she had written every line of it herself. The workers stayed. New ones came by word of mouth, the kind of word of mouth that travels when a place treats its people right, which is the best kind of reputation a ranch can have. The Garrison family got their water rights back. The Harmon family settled. Most of the 15 families in Ellen's ledger had been made as whole as the legal process could make them, which wasn't perfect and wasn't complete, but was more than they'd had any reason to expect. Savannah managed the accounts and taught herself land law from books Clara ordered from a publisher in Boston, and by the second year, she was negotiating contracts herself with the particular combination of warmth and precision that made people underestimate her, right up until they realized they had agreed to everything she wanted. She did not remarry. She did not seem to want to. She seemed mostly to want exactly what she had, which was work that was hers and a sister nearby, and no one making decisions for her body or her future. Clara thought that was more than reasonable. Ethan built the ranch the way Clara had described on that east fence line, the morning after the courthouse meeting, slowly, honestly, neighbor by neighbor. He was not his father's kind of businessman, and he never pretended to be. He was slower and more careful, and willing to take a smaller profit in exchange for a cleaner one. And the ranchers who partnered with him trusted him in the particular way people trust someone who has cost themselves something to be trustworthy. One evening in the spring of their 4th year, Clara stood on the hill that overlooked the south pasture with her daughter on her hip. Rose, 2 years old, with Ethan's dark eyes, and Clara's stubborn mouth, and an opinion about everything she encountered. Rose was watching the cattle in the pasture below, with the focused intensity of someone making a serious assessment. "Daddy says you saved this ranch," Rose said. The way 2-year-olds say things as facts, they are reporting, not questions they are asking. Clara looked at her daughter. "Papa says that..." Rose pointed at a cow. "That one's fat." "She is," Clara agreed. "That's good. It means she's healthy." "Did you save it?" Rose asked. Back to the original inquiry because 2-year-olds do not let things go. Clara thought about it. She thought about Ellen Caldwell's ledger in a tin box in a stone wall. She thought about Savannah's handwriting in the account books, and Ethan standing up in the courthouse, and Victor sitting alone with a letter. She thought about Marta's voice in a kitchen at dawn. She thought about a foal in a stable on the night everything changed. She thought about what it cost to walk through a door and what it cost to keep walking after. "No," Clara said. "We saved each other." Rose considered this with the gravity of someone filing important information. Then she reached up and grabbed a fistful of Clara's hair, which was her preferred method of expressing satisfaction. "Ow," Clara said. "Sorry," Rose said, without sounding it at all. Ethan appeared behind them. She heard his boots on the grass before she saw him. The familiar sound of him, the sound she had come to understand, was the sound of things being all right. He put his hand on her shoulder and looked out at the pasture with them. "She asked about the ranch," he said. "She did. What did you tell her?" "The truth." He was quiet for a moment. The evening light moved long across the Texas plains, gold going to amber, going to the first blue of dusk, and the cattle moved slowly below them, and the grass bent in the wind, the way Texas grass always has and always will. "Victor wants to come to dinner Sunday," Ethan said. Tell him to come." "You sure?" "He's her grandfather," Clara said. "He's earning that back. Let him keep earning it." Ethan turned and looked at her the way he had looked at her from the beginning, directly, like she was something worth seeing. "I love you," he said. The plain, unhurried kind of saying it that meant it most. "I know," Clara said. "I love you back." Rose grabbed Ethan's finger and held on with both hands and made a pronouncement in the garbled language of 2-year-olds that probably meant something important to her, even if it didn't translate. Behind them, the Caldwell house sat quiet and lit, and smaller than it used to be, and more itself than it had ever been. And Clara stood on that hill in the last of the evening light and let herself feel the full weight of what had been built here. Not the weight of burden, the weight that had bent her for so many years, but a different weight entirely. The weight of things that were real and earned and hers. Not chosen for her, not assigned to her, not taken from her. She had walked out of a room where people were deciding her future, taken a man's outstretched hand, and built something true from the rubble of 2 broken families, not because anyone rescued her, not because love solved the hard things, but because she had refused at every single turn to disappear. That was the story. That was the whole of it. A girl they hid in the stable became the woman who told the truth out loud, and the truth once spoken in a room full of people who needed to hear it could not be unspoken, could not be bought or burned or stepped aside from gracefully. It turned out, that was all it ever took. The courage to say the real number. The will to stay in the room. And the refusal, absolute, final, bone deep, to be invisible one day longer.